This interview was recorded at the 2012 SVS annual meeting in Washington, D.C.
Recently, the Society for Vascular Surgery decided to create an audiovisual program of contributors to vascular surgery, the leaders. The chairmanship under Dr. Jimmy Yao is being utilized for these interviews of leaders in vascular surgery. Today, I am Norman M. Rich, and I have the privilege and pleasure of interviewing Dr. Anthony D. Whittemore, MD, an established, respected, legendary surgeon who I've known for at least 30-some-odd years. Dr. Whittemore, we're extremely grateful to you for consenting to this interview. And we would like to start by asking you to give us a little bit of your background, knowing that you were born in Boston 68 years ago. Please tell us a little bit about your heritage, if you would.
Sure. Norm, first of all, let me say that I feel unbelievably honored to be included in this group, and I think this is just a tremendous initiative. Yeah, I was born in Boston and have a heritage with both its assets and its liabilities that go way, way back. On my maternal side, we go back to Peter Gansevoort, who was General Washington's northern general, who defended Fort Stanwix and kept the British at bay from coming over the Canadian border. And along his line, ultimately, was Herman Melville, and all the trials and tribulations that then disseminated from his progeny. On the other side of the family was old Sam Whittemore. Sam was a wonderful guy who came to this country and set up shop as a farmer in Arlington, just outside of Boston. And when the Revolution came along, he and 7 of his crony farmers took their pitchforks and marched out to Lexington to join the militia. And the militiamen took a look at them in their 80s and said, "No, old men, go home. We don't need you." So they did. They marched off. But on the way home, hid behind a stone wall. So when the British retreated, these guys got out with their pitchforks and began to wreak havoc with the British troops in retreat. Ultimately, of course, the Brits prevailed. He was stabbed, bayoneted 18 times. Crawled back to his home. They called the surgeon. The surgeon said there's no hope. Gave him the last rites, and that was that. Well, old Sam had another idea. He crawled around to the pub next door, had himself a couple of pints, crawled back home, lived another 8 years.
Phenomenal history, isn't it?
It's written up in Paul Revere's Ride, the whole story. He was a character. So there are others along the way there, but Boston has been basically our home. Actually, I grew up on the South Shore in a small town called Cohasset, which had about 2,000 year-round residents and then swelled in the summer. And the benefit of growing up there was that I had access across the street to sailing, to the ocean.
We all know the medical background of the Warren family. Were there any Whittemores in medicine, or what stimulated your interest in pursuing a career in medicine?
Right. No, there's been no one that's fallen prey to a medical career. I got interested in it as time went by for a number of reasons, not the least of which was that my father died at age 38 when I was 15. And 2 years later, my brother died. He was age 15 of melanoma. And I think those two events, needless to say, left an indelible impression on me at an age where I was kind of considering in high school which way I was going to go. I also had a wonderful course in biology in my sophomore year, who parenthetically was taught by my lacrosse coach. So all those came together in a wonderful way. I learned that I had some talent for the biological sciences, and it just flowed from there.
So mentorship is important to you?
Oh, clearly, without a doubt. And lifelong partnership, because during that time I met my current wife. She was my senior prom date. So it's been 46 years, and she was interested in becoming a nurse. So we had a lot of common values, and that's stood us in good stead in the interim.
We'll come back to the family life a little bit later, but sure. Tell us a little bit about your selection of medical school and what mentorship you had at that time.
Well, I was bound and determined never to go to Harvard for any reason whatsoever. Given the fact that my entire family had been to Harvard, I'm a direct descendant of Henry Dunster, the first president, and I was going to do it on my own. So I never applied to Harvard, and look what happened. They got me for 35 years. But, so I applied to several medical schools and mercifully was admitted to Columbia University, the College of Physicians and Surgeons, early admission, and my senior year in college was a breeze. It was a wonderful, wonderful honor, and the school was a terrific education.
Is it true in those days that you were interviewed by the dean?
I was not. It may have been, but I was not. I was interviewed by a wonderful internist, and it, needless to say, worked out well. But it was a great educational experience. We were not only at Columbia Presbyterian, but also through St. Luke's and Roosevelt and the old Bellevue, which was a real experience, and gave me a really firm footing in clinical medicine. It wasn't so robust with respect to the investigative side, but for clinical medicine, it couldn't be beaten.
Are there any of your teachers, your mentors at Columbia, that remain in your memory for influencing you at that time?
Oh yes, there are the pros and the cons. We'll dwell on the pros. Art Voorhees, in particular, was a real mentor for me. Sparked my interest in vascular surgery. And he was a wonderful means of support for many, many years. And then there were a host of others. Ken Ford was a wonderful mentor as well and has been a lifelong friend.
When you had such a positive experience, why did you select the track that you did for your residency training?
I applied to several different places, needless to say, and interestingly enough, I applied to both medical and surgical internships. I really wasn't sure until halfway through my last year which way I was going to go, which has a bearing on why I selected vascular surgery. Vascular surgery has the advantage of making you knowledgeable about an awful lot of internal medicine, because as you'll remember at that time, the care of patients with atherosclerotic disease fell to us. The cardiologists were becoming progressively segmented to that small organ in the middle of the chest, and the rest of the body seemed to fall by the wayside. So I remember starting out in practice as you did. We wrote the insulin prescriptions, the antihypertensives, the digitalis. Fortunately, we only had about 5 drugs at that time, but at any rate, it was a wonderful field. And all the way through the general surgical experience, vascular was high on the list right from the get-go.
Knowing that there were a number of cardiothoracic surgeons at Columbia who were quite strong, and knowing that your chairman was Keith Riensema, did you have any involvement with Dr. Riensema as an example?
Very much so. Keith came kind of halfway through my training and tried his best to enlighten me as to the virtues of cardiac surgery, as did several others, but I really felt in the long run perhaps vascular offered more breadth and more of what I was interested in terms of taking care of the whole patient. I had many mentors in cardiac surgery: Jim Baum, Fred Bowman, Keith, Dick Eady, a great crew, but I really held firm to the vascular end of it.
When you finished your training, were you obligated to serve in the military?
I was in the Berry Plan, and I think I was the last of the Berry planners ultimately to do time, which was a wonderful experience. I left Columbia to go work with John Manick for a year. That was the plan, and John was doing some things that weren't being done at Columbia. For instance, the extra anatomic bypasses, the long femorotibials, femoral toe artery bypasses, and the modern management of aneurysms. We were still at Columbia in the era of doing 4, 5, 6-hour procedures to fix aneurysms with the ultimate post-traumatic, post-clamping shock and all the sequelae. And John had another way of approaching it that I really wanted to do. And then I was going back in partnership with Art Voorhees after I did my military duty. But halfway through the Boston experience, John had moved to the Peter Bent Brigham at the time and offered to give me a job there after my military duty. And since both my wife and I are from Boston, it didn't take more than a nanosecond to say, hey, this is a great opportunity.
John had an Air Force background. Why did you choose the Navy?
He did. Well, my father was a Navy pilot, I'm not sure that I actually had a choice. I think there were some check marks there on the Berry plan, but it was really up to serendipity as to how I got into the Navy, and maybe legacy played a part. I don't know, but I've been eternally grateful, and obviously being a mariner myself and growing up on the water, I felt very comfortable at sea.
And you had 2 years at Portsmouth Naval Hospital in Norfolk, Virginia, is that correct?
I did. It was just an amazing experience. Here's a huge teaching hospital. 85% of that Tidewater area is retired military. And I had a practice there that was 400 arterial reconstructions a year, which is not something that I would ever begin to get in a civilian setting. We had 4 residents on my service, all of whom were just fabulous surgeons, fabulous people, and it was a wonderful experience.
As you look toward your future, what made you decide to go back to Boston?
Well, I think first of all, it was a wonderful opportunity to work with John Manick. And I saw there a hospital setting that I could get my arms around, and it had an investigative bent to it. Clearly, everybody in the Department of Surgery there had some interest in research, had either done or was doing wet lab work. All of them were interested in clinical trials, and it was an academic incubator for ideas, and just a tremendously exciting place.
Let's talk a little bit about your research interests, because you've had a phenomenal number of grants, including a number of R01 grants from the National Institutes of Health. Please expand a little bit on your research interests.
Sure. When I went back to the Brigham to start out, it was clear that I wanted to build a vascular practice and work with Dr. Manick, and that I wanted to start to evolve an investigative component to my career, which would have been very difficult at Columbia. And he provided the opportunity to do both. And oh, by the way, Andy, I'd like you to run the general surgical residency program and join the transplant service and fix that too. So, okay. So I had a number of jobs during that first decade, not the least of which was trying to get a research program up and running, which was not easy, although I've got to say at the time we had a clinical revenue stream that we could support seed money and bridge funds. It's just not feasible now, and I was definitely a beneficiary of that to get up and running. And the thought was, at the time, we were engaged in this debate as to the role of synthetics in peripheral bypass surgery. And was it better, could we make it better than autogenous vein? And as you know, that's where I landed for the most part of my early career. So we were interested in the biology of the arterial wall, and the smooth muscle response to injury formed the basis of most of my research for the next decade. I had wonderful mentors. Mike Gimbroni was terrific in helping me along as well. He's a pathologist who had a huge effort.
If you were asked of what you're most proud from your research activities, how would you reflect on that today?
I think from my research activities, probably the recognition of the evolution of vein graft stenosis, what happens, how it occurs, and its significance going forward. That if you recognize it up front and deal with it, then you can prolong the patency of a reconstruction, whereas if you ignore it and the graft fails, then the game's up. But what we did, or what we tried to do, was to develop some kind of intervention that would thwart the smooth muscle proliferative response to injury, which is no less important nowadays with endovascular approaches than it was then. And the problem that we were facing then, we still face now. And that is, there are a lot of agents that will prevent smooth muscle cells, that will just stop them dead in their tracks. But it also stops other things dead in their tracks. So getting those agents to the point where they were needed without damaging the rest was the major issue. And we got up to the point where we were actually transfecting cells with retroviruses, and still it was an ongoing evolution of knowledge, as all scientific discovery is, and we all stand on each other's shoulders, and hopefully we've contributed something to that end.
With the advances in molecular biology, do you think that there's any genetic component to this that you're getting your hand on, or?
Oh, I think there is. I think the whole issue of metalloproteinases and how this all evolves, there's no question that genetics are there. There's a proclivity.
You know, the scientific aspect is extremely important, but we're all clinically based. What about vascular fellowships? Tell us a little bit about your thoughts about vascular fellowships and what you think might be the future for vascular fellowships.
I think there's no question that vascular fellowships are critical. Just as much as you can't take a general surgeon in community level practice and expect them to deliver the same kinds of results doing a pancreaduodenectomy, the same is true with the high-end vascular procedures. You just get better at it with experience and more exposure, and I think clearly vascular fellowships, as well as other surgical subspecialty fellowships, are going to deliver better care to our patients, and that's what it's all about. The issue about fellowships that we've been facing is the longevity. How long can you expect young people to prolong their adolescence until they finally get turned out and can practice? And that's the issue that we're facing now with trying to contract that tenure from 7 years down to a reasonable 4 or 5, which I firmly believe is eminently doable.
We know that we have 4 pathways in vascular fellowships today. What do you think about the 0-5 pathway that's been in place since 2006?
I think potentially it's probably the better alternative of all of them, given what medical students are coming out of medical school with in terms of their debt, given the constraints that we're all facing with respect to clinical reimbursement, given the changing landscape of how we're actually delivering care from a business standpoint, going into the ACO salaried structure from a fee-for-service structure. I think these guys need to get out and practice their specialty and help us with the shortage, with the manpower shortage that we're facing. When you look at the aging population and the logarithmic rate of growth versus the number of vascular surgeons coming out of training.
Since you've had multiple residency responsibilities, how does all of this impact on general surgery training?
Well, it's been my belief for many years that general surgeons are worth their weight in gold, no doubt about it. I think you have different levels of general surgery. To ask a highly trained general surgeon who has been through 6-7 years with advanced fellowships to go into a community level of practice is probably unrealistic. And the same is true if a general surgeon trains in a program where that high intensity, resource intensive surgery is not done. It's not realistic to ask them to function in that kind of environment either. So I've long advocated a decision-making process that helps people triage their thinking into where they want to practice, what location. Right. And that should dictate to some extent as to how they're trained. So I think that there's a certain level of general surgery that we all need, a core, and then there's advanced. And why can't we have advanced general surgery? And those are the people that do the complex hepatobiliary work. We've done that in all other specialties. Why not declare it in general surgery as well?
With the endovascular revolution and the fact that catheter-based procedures are the majority of vascular interventions today, the general surgery residents don't have all that much exposure in those areas. Is there any way that they might be included from your perspective?
I think it's a real challenge, Norm. Frankly, I don't see it. If we're going to train the right kind of people to take care of our aging population, I just can't see that. Given the increasingly limited number of open procedures that are done today, is it realistic to be able to train everybody, even to 2 or 3 cases during a general surgical residency program? I'm not so sure that that's...
In your hospital, do you have 0-5 vascular fellowship now?
We have that available.
Available, okay,
Yep.
Good. We've been told that we're up to about 42 programs now in the United States after the original 6 in 2006, 2007, so it'll be interesting to see how that goes, but thank you for sharing your thoughts. In your hospital, how do you interface with the interventional radiologists and the interventional cardiologists?
Interesting challenge, Norm. You and I were both in the thick of it back in the 90s when angioplasty really came on the fore, actually early in the early 80s, but it became a real entity in the mid 80s where we needed to deal with the interventional radiologists. And the interventional radiologists had the catheter-based skills, no doubt about it, but they didn't have the patient population. They didn't have the referral practice. And we, of course, did. And it was a natural marriage. If the two could get together and deliver the right care with the right skill set, we can cross-train. There were assets that were complementary. That wasn't seen unanimously as a broad perspective. And we ran head-on into the political specter of the endovascular group, and were never really able to come to grips with putting it together on a national front. So this happened foxhole by foxhole in each little hospital. And what we did, Norm, was actually get together in a non-threatening way so that we didn't combine financially, which was the major threat, but we did combine in a philosophical center. So we had all of our practices co-located, the vascular medical group, a subset of cardiology, the interventional radiologists, and the vascular surgeons were all co-located, and we saw each other's patients readily. If I saw a patient where I thought their coronary disease needed to be managed a little bit more effectively, I could run across the hall, and Mark Krieger or one of the cardiologists would come across, and we'd get it all done in one step. So wherever a patient was referred into, the cardiologist, the interventionalist, or the surgeon, we were able to bring the expertise of all three at the same time.
You established effective communications.
We did, not without humps along the way, but ultimately we did. And you know, it worked out very well, Norm, because our referring population knew that if they referred to one of us, they would get all perspectives. And it was some comfort to them to know that if they referred to a surgeon, they wouldn't necessarily get an operation, which has been the mantra in the past, of course. The other thing that was beneficial is that if they were admitted to the hospital, then as they were discharged, they had the benefit of a really complex management plan for longitudinal care that we wrote and then sent to the referring and the primary care physician. Yeah. We were a little apprehensive as to how that would be perceived by the big ivory tower arrogant egos, but actually it was very well received, and our volume took off. It was astounding.
You provided very effective leadership for us in vascular surgery, from the New England Vascular to the North American chapter of the International Society for Cardiovascular Surgery, to even following as the Secretary General of the International Cardiovascular Society. Tell us a little bit about your perspective about vascular societies and where we are today.
Well, that takes us back again, Norm, to some real challenges, which are, you know, not totally unlike what's going on with the Eurozone at the moment. We had the International Society for Cardiovascular Surgery that had been in place for years and years, and the meetings were successful, the publication was successful, which was the Journal of Cardiovascular Surgery. And it was the cardio component of that we found difficult to market. Who were we? We really weren't very many cardiac surgeons, and the cardiac surgeons that were in the group were older generation, and the younger ones, of course, were all going to their own specialty societies. And then so that we had the journal issue, and Elsevier wasn't exactly the most accommodating publisher to work with at the time. The second issue did have to do with an identity crisis. You know, were we vascular surgeons? Were we cardiac surgeons? And the public really couldn't differentiate. And we felt that we really needed to put a stake in the ground as peripheral vascular surgeons. And in order to do that, we also had the Society for Vascular Surgery, and there was attempts on my part and many others to bring them together much earlier on than has been the case. Ultimately, the result was great, and it thrived very well. But the challenges in trying to resurrect a international society of vascular surgery was really fraught by parochialism. The different countries around the world got very defensive and withdrawn, and as I say, it's very much like the Eurozone at the moment in terms of.
Is there still a European chapter of the International Cardiovascular Society?
I honestly haven't kept up with it,
Well,
Norm. But
I think there is.
there probably is. But
from what you said, you must be happy in 2012 to see the success of the combined vascular societies in the United States.
oh, I am,
Yeah.
Norm. It was the absolute logical thing to do. And again, there was some parochialism at the time, and understandable. But it was very difficult trying to have that happen. Ultimately, I'm very, very pleased that it happened.
There's still a couple of national vascular societies, like the Society for Clinical Vascular Surgery, the Peripheral Vascular Surgery Society, the Canadian Vascular Society, with all the regional vascular societies and local societies. Do you think we have too many vascular societies?
You know, I really don't, Norm. I think the regional societies are great, particularly for young people and people who haven't really stepped up or emerged as national leaders. It's a wonderful outlet for them to talk with their colleagues in the same region, to present papers, to get their ideas out. It's a great source of satisfaction. The other societies, the same thing. The Society for Clinical Vascular Surgery, it gives people an outlet. The major SVS meeting is limited in terms of the amount of time that you can spend, the number of papers you can accept, and yet our knowledge base is just logarithmically increasing, and I think those societies give vent to that.
How do you think we as Americans are doing on the world scene in vascular surgery? Do you think we're providing leadership, or do you think other countries are equal to us?
I think the opportunities are worldwide, Norm. I mean, you look at the major contributions that have gotten us where we are, Favallero, Juan Perotti. I mean, I think that there are innovators in the whole world community, and we need to keep an open mind as to what those innovations look like, and foster them, embrace them, and help move the field along.
You were an invited speaker to the Royal Australasian College of Surgeons at one time. Tell us a little bit about that experience.
Oh, that was fun, as all international exchanges are. It's very important to bring the community together to share experiences, both what we've learned that's positive as well as the negatives. It was a great society. They have a very close-knit, enthusiastic group. And they were really on the forefront, as you well know, of some of the endovascular approaches, particularly with aneurysmal disease. And it was an extraordinary experience.
We'd like to talk a little bit about surgery in general, but before we do that, and before we leave vascular surgery, with the aging population in the United States, with the increasing need for vascular surgeons, what do you see on the horizon for us other than just challenges? Do you have any answers for how we're going to handle the increased need?
I wish I did. I think it's very clear that, as you say, the aging population is going to double very shortly, within 15 or 20 years. The number of graduates coming out of medical schools is totally capped at the moment. In spite of the fact that we've added a number of new medical schools, it still falls way short of the number of physicians that we need. And I'm talking about primary care physicians all the way through to the specialists like vascular surgeons. So I think we're in a crisis situation, and at the same time, we need more physicians. The number of residents we can train for which we get reimbursed is capped, as you know, and there has to be some compromise here in order for us to supply the number of physicians that are going to be necessary. Second, the role of physician extenders has to be expanded, and that's the only salvation, I think, for primary care practices. And they're very, very competent, as are experienced nurse practitioners. And I think we can rely on that component to help us.
We know that this challenge is in the hands of those who we have trained, and we've heard about some of your mentors. Are there any of your trainees of whom you're particularly proud and think will do a good job in the future for us?
Norm, at the risk of, not giving credit to all of them, they're all terrific. They've all done a wonderful job in their locations. I guess it's natural for me to take particular pride in those who have gone on to leadership positions and have maintained the scientific integrity of their initial endeavors. So I look at Clues, Alec Clues. I look at Craig Kent, who's chair at Wisconsin now. Mike Conti, Chair of Vascular Surgery at UCSF, Gib Upchurch, who is now back home down south at UVA, as individuals who have had leadership positions, increasingly so, and yet have still maintained their scientific endeavors.
No, thank you for sharing that with us. You are one of very few vascular surgeons who has also accepted additional senior administrative responsibility, being the chief operating officer for 13 years at the Harvard Peter Bent Brigham Change to Women's Combined Hospital in Boston. Tell us a little bit about why you made that decision and what impact it's had on your career.
Yeah, it's an interesting evolution. I've sort of done things in decades, and I was building a vascular practice and did my investigative work, my wet research work, and ran the general surgical residency for a decade. Then the chief of vascular surgery as we built a new division and all the issues that we were facing that we've touched on. And then the last decade as chief medical officer. Along the way, thanks in no small part to John Manick, I had increasing leadership roles in the department and then in the hospital. And I got to a point where, you know, you've done 15,000 arterial reconstructions, and I kind of looked around and I said, okay, what's the next chapter? What are the opportunities here? And I had a chance to do what I thought was more of an impact on a larger number of people in a really good institution. I had a number of opportunities to be a department chair, but you know, as time went by, it was pretty clear to me that the options for department chairs were kind of closing in as the revenue stream began to dry up, and the power of the purse transferred to the institution. And therefore, I felt, okay, I've got an opportunity here to make a difference in an institution. In terms of making it a safer place, I had some ideas that I thought were worth trying, and to make it a more comfortable place. There's a lot of behavior that has been tolerated for years and years, and it was just uncomfortable. And can I do anything about these challenges? And therefore accepted that position and never looked back. It has been a wonderful experience.
Knowing a little bit of the history of Dr. Codman in Boston and the challenges in hospitals and so forth, it's interesting that two vascular surgeons would provide leadership in recent years in Boston, with Tom O'Donnell at Tufts doing something similar to what you did. Did you find an opportunity to talk to Tom about your mutual challenges or to help each other?
We did, although both environments were so uniquely different that there wasn't a lot of transferable experience, but we certainly took comfort in each other's frustrations, for sure. So it was, and it hasn't been easy. For instance, it dawned on me one day as I was buying a box of nails for a project at home. And of course the box was barcoded. And as I brought it up to the cashier, she scanned it, and into the computer it went. Their inventory was updated, my bank account was debited, and I was out of there. And the next day I was driving into the hospital, and I said, what's wrong with us? Why aren't we using this in medicine? And at the time there were some trials in the VA system, which was doing it, and a couple of the community hospitals had started to look at it. And it took me 2 years to convince the hospital administration that this was a worthwhile thing to do, and I had to do battle with the CFO at the time. And I won't go into the actual expletives that were used at that meeting, but his perspective was, you know, Andy, I got to worry about the bottom line. And I said, yeah, but I got to worry about dead patients. And the CEO said, you got it, Andy. So $11 million were dedicated to bringing barcode medication administration into the hospital. And over the next 3 years we did that and have actually reduced medication errors by 50%. And it's been a wonderful godsend and continues to evolve, but it's made a difference in a safer environment. So that's just one example of the kinds of things that you can do as a chief medical officer.
In recent years, we've seen a number of attempted combinations of shared responsibilities, if you will, that have failed. In Boston, between your hospital and Massachusetts General Hospital, and particularly with Mike Zinner and Andy Warshaw. I think everybody has been very pleased to see the success. Would you comment on that, please?
Yeah, I think Partners has been very fortunate, and fortunate in the founding members from both boards of trustees who put this together in the early 90s. And it was very clear that there were a number of motivations, but it was also very clear that they didn't want to mess up two successful institutions by trying to marry them, which has not been the case with several other systems around the country, as you know. But what we haven't done is what the Mayo and Geisinger and others in Intermountain has done, and that is actually standardize in ways that we can that would be cost saving. There's a lot of opportunity for more cross-training there. There's opportunity for regionalization, which is really challenging. For instance, why should two major hospitals be doing cardiac transplantation, liver transplantation, face transplantation? Why aren't we concentrating one in each hospital? And that's a difficult pill to swallow, but one we're taking a run at. But I think in general, yes, it's been a very cordial, healthy competition, but a cordial relationship that's worked well.
Among your numerous presidencies, you hold the presidency of the American Surgical Association, and you're one of three surgeons, your mentor, John Manick, Laser Greenfield, in an organization that has had questions about vascular surgeons and vascular surgery. Please tell us a little bit about your relationship and what you thought about that opportunity to be president of the American Surgical Association.
Well, it was a tremendous honor, totally unexpected, and just a wonderful opportunity to work with some really, really brilliant people, and it's been phenomenal. And I'll come back to that in just a moment. But while I was secretary of the and president of the ISCVS, and we were in the negotiations with the American Board of Surgery to take more ownership of the examination process, it allowed me an opportunity to, again, interact with members of the board, members of the general surgical population, to kind of state our case. Some of our members were more threatening than others in terms of their approach, and my approach was try to be more facilitatory. How can we make this work for all people involved in this equation, which is the patient at the bottom line, but who is writing the questions, and are they the ones with the expertise that should be writing the questions and doing the oral examinations? Are the general surgeons best equipped to do this nowadays, or have we evolved as a specialty to the point where we should really take ownership of this? And I think most of us all felt that way, and that we needed to do this. And there's an understandable reluctance on the part of the general surgeons to, let another specialty kind of off the hook. The ultimate solution with a vascular sub-board and now the current board was wonderful. What a great compromise. And it solved the problem. And it was a wonderful opportunity, which then allowed me to interact with a number of people in a very positive way that ultimately led me into the American Surgical, which has been a 20-year sentence, mind you. So I was on the program committee for 4 years, then 5 years, then treasurer for 5 years, then president-elect, and then you're on the foundation for 5 years, and the nominating committee. Anyway, it adds up. So I'm not done yet, and I love every minute of it. It's been a terrific experience.
We certainly appreciate your representation for all of us. Again, in an organization that hasn't been particularly friendly to vascular surgery over the years. Our chairman, Dr. Jimmy Yao, who's with us today, wants you to talk about your presidential address a little bit, and we've all had a chance to reread that, if you will. And you mentioned earlier you were a little bit apprehensive. Would you tell us about that presidential address?
Well, I was. Being a chief medical officer there are 3,000 members of our staff, physicians on the staff. And of those 3,000 members, it's not unrealistic to expect some of them to kind of get stressed and off the wire from a variety of different afflictions along the way. And there's an incredible amount of time that is spent in dealing with those individuals, because you want to be fair, but you have an institution and patients to look out for. And my thought was, okay, we have a problem here. We're going to deal with it in a remedial way. This is not about punishment. This is about getting something fixed, getting a problem defined, and getting the right help. And there are a number of different options that I spelled out in that address. And it has been a fascinating experience. And part of that effort was to establish a change in culture. So not only was there a change in the culture of safety, where we had to convince nurses and physicians to report near misses or mistakes and reassure them that that wasn't going to result in punishment to some way, but we wanted to know what was broken so we could fix it. Same is true with the staff. And it took a while before people were willing to come to say, you know, good old George has been like this forever, I know, but it's really gotten out of hand. And so I'd sit down with good old George and we'd go through it, and you know, there are some that are self-aware and there are others that are totally clueless, and it's a real challenge to trying to work yourself and that person through a maze of therapeutic options. But in doing so, you know, 90% of those individuals were in fact appropriately addressed and are back in active practice. And these are people with executive function disorders, with substance abuse, with underlying bipolar disorder, what have you, that can really be helped and become a productive member of our staff again. So we set up this Center for Professionalism and Peer Support, which was designed to find the individual who's having problems one way or the other early, because it only gets worse. And if there's anything I've learned, you need to get after those individuals right from the get-go. In fact, the characteristics were probably there in nursery school and just hadn't been addressed along the way, and need to be.
Were medical psychologists and/or psychiatrists a part of your management of these challenges?
Absolutely. And we have the ability to do full psychometrics on neuropsychometrics and at the drop of a hat. And it's been well received, and it's been very informative, particularly the emerging field of executive function disorders, where people have trouble with organizational skills, time management, prioritization, skills that we are required to rely on, and it can be helped.
If somebody resists your suggestions or denies what you just mentioned, what are the legal ramifications of that, and what type of a legal staff did you have?
I fired two. Without cause. We're contractually not obligated to have cause, but it has to be done carefully and thoughtfully, no doubt about it. And I do have a legal staff. My two best friends turned out to be the hospital attorney and the risk manager.
Well, you know, being here in the shadow of Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., one of the big exchanges yesterday on Capitol Hill was with a number of our representatives, elected representatives. We're at the 10-year mark with the PAC for the Society for Vascular Surgery. Do you think we as vascular surgeons should be more involved politically?
Norm, I think that is a very, very difficult question. And it's a line that we can cross to our detriment, in fact have in the past, in my opinion. Most of what the congressional representatives and congressmen hear, as you know, and the senators, are filtered through the staffers.
Right.
And it is absolutely critical to come across to the staffers as wanting to build a constructive relationship. If we go to them with a laundry list, whining and complaining, we will get absolutely nowhere. So I think, yes, there is an advantage to it. I don't know whether going through conventional lobbying activity is the right answer, because I think that makes them lean toward they're just whining. So I think we have to reevaluate and constantly reevaluate our approach. But yes, we need to be involved in an educational effort.
Having our headquarters in the American College of Surgeons building in Chicago and being part of the American College of Surgeons with their building here in Washington, D.C., do you think it's wise for us to work through our college as...
I would. I mean, I think the louder the voice, the larger the aggregate, the more chance we have of having our case brought forward. And I think we're in sync with the American College on most things, so that would be, yes, a worthwhile venture.
Since we're talking about politics and money and that type of thing, and you've had such a strong background in research, Where do you think we are today with funding for research? What's happening to the NIH and recruiting young people to go into research? Do you see a future for us?
I think we're at a critical juncture, Norm, no doubt about it. You know, if you look at the grand scheme of things where we're spending 18 to 20% of our GDP on healthcare, that's unconscionable. Particularly if you look at our outcomes relative to other industrialized countries that are spending half that much. It's just not justifiable. And where is all that money going? So we've got to do better, no question about it. But until we do so, given our national deficit, I don't see money being allocated in any extraordinary way to research, or for that matter, to educational programs or whatever. I think we're facing continued cutbacks. So from the standpoint of research, what that does is foster the necessity for academia to partner with industry in a much more constructive collegial way than we've been able to in the past. And with very straightforward ground rules with respect to conflict of interest and salary support, whatever has to be worked out. I think we're making progress, we're going along, but I'm worried at the moment that a lot of our young people who can't generate the data and the firepower to be funded are leaving for industry. And that actually academia is going to find out there's a lack of young energy in our programs going forward. That's a worry that I have.
You see leadership from private schools like Harvard and Johns Hopkins and Stanford helping with this, with their working with industry reasonably effectively, and
No. I go back to Judah Folkman's trials with angiotensin, and they're pretty exemplifies the issues with state universities and academia. There is progress being made. I shouldn't be so emphatic, but it is very slow and ponderous.
Yeah. Well, good things do take a lot of time and effort, I know. You've been so busy in so many areas. Do tell us a little bit about your own family.
Yes. So as I say, for reasons that aren't altogether clear, other than that she's a saint, my wife has been with me for 46 years now. We have 3 wonderful children. One is an investment banker who can probably advise Washington on a lot of this. He works for Deutsche Bank and is climbing up there in the hierarchy. Our middle child, Josh, worked for Tom Fogarty for a while in the device industry and engineering, and is now a computer developer, is what he really is, working for independent firm. He lives in Oregon. And Sarah, our youngest, is a school teacher in the public school system down in southern Massachusetts. She is married, has 3 children. Our oldest boy has 3 children, so we have 6 grandchildren, all under the age of 10. And they're absolutely delightful and thoroughly exhausting.
Are you disappointed there are no doctors in your immediate family?
Not at all. I was hands off totally. And very interestingly, my oldest, Andy, said that he didn't want to go into medicine because he didn't want to have to work as hard as I did. And of course, he was around, he was actually born the night before our physiology and pharmacology exam in medical school. So he was around for the duration of the training issues. And yet he went to work for Solomon Brothers and then for Deutsche Bank, and of course put 120, 130 hours a week in for years. So it's interesting.
How would you advise medical students today who say everybody in the school tells them that if you become a surgeon, you won't have a life? How do you respond to that?
I say, first of all, you need to choose your specialty based on your lifestyle. I mean, you can't just go generically to surgery. You need to look at the different components of surgery. And second of all, I've always had I've had several rules, but one of which was to leave the hospital at 6. End of discussion. Unless somebody was bleeding or it was turning black, leave the hospital at 6. So I had dinner with my family. And if I had to go back later on, that's fine. They wouldn't miss me. And I used to set the alarm clock at 3 in the morning, and I'd get up and I'd have a couple of hours that was totally to myself, quiet, and that's when I did my writing and what little thinking I was able to do. And it was, that's how I kind of managed the balance. And yes, I missed Christmases and baseball games, but tried to
But
keep
you
the balance.
know, that's beautiful to pass on to those who follow us, and we all recognize that if you're going to succeed in any profession, you're going to have to work. I mean, this business
doubt.
about have a life, I'm not quite sure where it comes from, but your life certainly has emphasized the positive aspect of being a surgeon and a vascular surgeon. Is there anything that you would like to add before we end this interview about vascular surgery or surgery in general?
Well, first of all, I look at my career as an amazing privilege. I wouldn't change a thing. Not a thing, Norm. It's just been an extraordinary experience. But I guess in vascular surgery in particular, I would emphasize the fact that we're a team. When we first went into vascular surgery, that wasn't the case. You were kind of a standalone entity. But we have evolved into a team, and that's what it takes to take care of a patient with diffuse atherosclerosis. And we need all components of the expertise to work together and communicate effectively. And we need different parts of the medical establishment to do that. We need physician extenders, as they say, among others. We need administrators. We need everybody on the team to take care of the patient. And I guess that's the main message. Who's at the center of this equation? Isn't it the patient and his or her family?
Yeah. No, well, thank you very much. I think among surgeons, there's a consensus toward what you're saying. As we expand the team, do you think we'll have challenges with convincing some of our partners that they need to be part of the team?
No doubt in my mind.
Okay. Well, that's again back to your presidential address. On behalf of the Society for Vascular Surgery, Dr. Whittemore, we'd like to thank you very much for this interview. And Andy, it's been a pleasure to sit here with you and to talk today. Thank you very much.
The privilege and the pleasure is all mine, Norm. Thanks.